And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. The Air Quality Health Index provides a number from 1 to 10 to indicate the level of health risk associated with local air quality. Occasionally, when the amount of air pollution is abnormally high, the number may exceed 10. On today's Open Connection, we bring you this story from 1990.
Sometimes the smoke is so bad it makes you want to get sick. It makes you start gagging on your own breath. You get headaches, severe sinus headaches, severe sinus pain, just generally feeling awful. You just don't feel healthy at all.
What can you do?
Not much. I do take asthma drugs, which sort of relieve the pain a certain amount. The more sick you get, the more infection sets in, or you're more susceptible to it, so you end up with pneumonia or other problems, and that's not always easy to cope with every winter.
Kim is not alone. Smithers doctors, spurred on by complaints from their patients, have rallied round the issue of air quality.
Well, I think it all started because we noticed just on an anecdotal basis that a lot of patients were complaining of frequent respiratory infections, a lot of coughing. And I think what strikes you most too is the people who moved from outside Smithers into Smithers, who didn't have any prior respiratory problems, said to us, you know, geez, I never had any problems with my lungs before, and as soon as I moved here, I started having all these problems. And if you hear that enough times, you know, once or twice, you wouldn't think much of it, but if it became sort of a common experience, then you start to wonder, well, you know, why? Well, why is this happening?
Environment Ministry staff in Smithers also believe there's a problem with the air over Smithers.
Well, we think there is because you can see a layer of smoke lying over the town most of the winter. When you come down the hill from Telqua and look across the town, you can see that there's smoke lying close to the ground in a layer between the ground and clearer air that's lying over top of it. And the problem gets worse during what we call temperature inversions, when we have a layer of cold air being held in, dense, heavy cold air being held in by an upper layer of warm air. You've been on the ski hill when it's minus 20 here and it's minus 7 up there. That's a temperature inversion, and that tends to hold the air into the valley bottom. Smoke builds up in it, and you can see this layer. We also think that there's an air quality problem because the physicians tell us that they see a lot of, particularly young children, with respiratory problems. So those are the two field marks, if you like, that suggest that there is an air quality problem here that's related to smoke.
There has been some basic air testing going on in Smithers for years. High-volume samplers measure the total particulate in the air, particulate that ranges in size from 0.3 to 25 microns. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. This testing indicates Smithers air rarely exceeds the ministry objective for particulate in the air. Despite that, Brian Wilkes is convinced there is an air quality problem due to wood smoke.
Even though we're not exceeding the air quality objective for particulate, there's still a problem because we can see it and you can smell it. If you walk around in the neighborhoods, it smells of wood smoke. Let me show you what this high-vol sampler measures. Here is an unexposed filter. We have these samplers on the roof of schools in town here. This is an unexposed high-volume filter. This is the way it looks when we install it in the instrument prior to it starting up and running for 24 hours. This is the exposed high-vol filter after the 24-hour period. So this material represents the particulate suspended in the atmosphere and captured on this filter.
And even that, I mean, it looks terrible. It looks like there's lots of junk in the air, and that still isn't in excess of the objective.
Well, I don't know about this one because it hasn't been measured yet. It hasn't been weighed. We weigh it prior to exposure and then after exposure. I would say that's about average. This one was taken on the 20th of October, and if you smell it, it smells of wood smoke.
The majority of council says there isn't a problem with smoke in Smithers, and until a proper case can be made, no action will be taken.
Council's position seems odd, especially in light of its own resolution passed this fall declaring Smithers an environmentally sensitive town. Northup recalls the air quality issue first being raised in Smithers about 6 years ago, but says it's really only been in the last year and a half that it's gained attention. Part of that attention has come from the medical community. So, medically speaking, what's so bad about wood smoke?
Well, okay, what's known about wood smoke is it does contain a lot of gases and particles that can affect the lung. The larger particles are filtered out quite efficiently by the nose and the upper respiratory tract, but smaller, very fine particles do get down into the lungs, and these fine particles can carry chemical compounds that are from combustion that can cause cancer, and that would be the most serious thing. But this probably requires long-term exposure, such as like cigarette smoke. But they also may provoke respiratory problems in terms of like an irritant, acting as an irritant.
So wood smoke is bad, but in Smithers, where is it coming from?
Well, nothing is substantiated at this point, but one of the things that was apparent and most visible was the sawmill burners. Since then, I think people have recognized that there are other sources of wood smoke as well, being the homeowners' wood stoves, the Ministry of Forest and the company slash burning programs, the land clearing slash burning, and as well as the sawmill burners. So there's not one, and I don't believe there's any one single source that is creating the problem.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Slash is leftover tree limbs, tops, and other residue left by logging activities. The forest industry is required to dispose of leftover slash and the wood residue to reduce fire hazards. Let us return to the archives with Gary Hansen.
Gary Hansen is forestry supervisor with Pacific Inland Resources in Smithers. He's the man in charge of that company's slash burning program.
Oh, definitely slash burning contributes smoke to the Bulkley Valley, but the question is how much? And there's a lot of indications province-wide that slash burning doesn't contribute as much as a lot of people think it does.
Well, Gary, how do you address people then who say things? I mean, you were at the protest when the doctors staged their protest, and they're telling you that people are sick and that they can tell there's a difference when certain, I guess, sources are at work, and slash burning is one of them. I mean, what do you think then, that people are wrong, that they're mixing things up?
Oh no, I think I'm sure they are right when they say that the smoke is a problem. But you got to remember that at the same time that slash burning starts, which is usually in September. Also, people start lighting up their wood stoves. The farmers are burning windrows, and of course the burner here at the mill is still going. So there are a lot of factors. We can get inversions around that time period. There's a lot of factors you have to look at.
Beehive burners are also implicated in Smithers' bad air problem. Ross Johnson is the mill manager at PIR.
And we recognize that the beehive burners are certainly a contributive smoke in the valley. Under the present tools that are available to us, a beehive burner is the only one that we have right now that will deal with the waste that we have to deal with in the plant. As you understand, when a round log comes in and we have to take the bark off and we've got sawdust coming out of it and so forth, that portion of the log has to be dealt with in some way. There's two known methods right now of dealing with it, is either burning it or in a landfill. The landfill option to us is not a consideration.
Well, let's look at those two contributors just a little bit further. If slash burning and beehive burners are part of the smoke problem and it's making people sick, why can't they be stopped?
Certainly on some sites it wouldn't be that big of a problem, but on a lot of our sites what will happen, I think, is that the alternatives to prescribed fire may be more potentially damaging than the prescribed fire itself. For instance, if you don't practice prescribed fire, and you mechanically treat an area, that means you have big machinery on a site, and that could potentially damage the soil resource. We also find on our areas that we burn, we use less chemical, less herbicides. If you don't burn, regardless of what sort of mechanical treatment you use, you're going to leave a lot of fuel on the site, and that fuel remains, especially in this area, a high fire hazard for many years to come. So you can go to all the trouble of preparing the site mechanically, plant it, still have the hazard there, and 10 years later, a fire can go through there and take away all your equity that you've built up in the site.
Johnson says given the current state of affairs, if ordered to shut the beehive burner down, the plant goes down too. He says the burner is integral to the sawmill, but he says they can operate the burner efficiently.
We really have no difficulty holding our burner within either. We are limited to a 30% opacity guideline on our burner, which means 100% opacity is you can't see through the smoke. 0 is there's no discernible smoke coming out of the burner. And our burner operates during operating hours, generally between 0 and 5 on our opacity, unless we've got some production problems in the facility, and which time we've seen areas up as high as 10. During the startup, though, before we've got the temperature up in the burner, yes, we do have some problems, and that is one that we can't deal with.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Most sawmills burn the trim ends, slabs, bark, shavings, and sawdust left over from logs that have been cut. Let us return to the archives with Ross Johnson.
To solve the smoke problem that's in the valley, we have to address the smoke that's being created all around us. We can't target one or two specific areas. It won't address the issue. And to do it properly, all of the mills are going to have to join in and get together and deal with all of the waste in one facility. There's another problem there as well, and when you're building a cogeneration or power generation unit, you can't build a power generation unit that will use 100% of one mill's waste. If your mill production fluctuates, or for some reason there's a period of time when you're developing less waste, then you've put that power generation in jeopardy. It can't operate. So they have to design the facility to handle a little bit less waste than what you produce. When you combine all of the mills together, it's easier then to have a facility that can take the ups and downs from each operation and level them out. There probably still will be a need for one burner of incinerator of some form, as well as a generation unit to handle the fluctuating flows.
Johnson adds, though, there will be enough waste to fuel that burner for 24 hours per day, doing away with smoke problems typical of the startup and cool-down periods experienced now. The Municipal Council of Smithers wants proof that there's an air quality problem and proof it has a negative effect on health. The Ministry of Environment is working on the air quality evidence.
We installed a new machine called a transmissometer, and what it does is measure local visual distance in an attempt to get a better handle on the amount of particulate that's actually in the air. We wanted the transmissometer for two reasons. The first one is that it would probably give us a better measurement of particulate in the air at levels that are lower than the 150 micrograms. And also it would give us what we call a real-time measurement. It would give us a measurement in the very hour that it was made.
That real-time estimate could be used to alert people considering burning whether, based on that day's air quality, burning is advisable or not.
We'll be able to compare the particulate data collected on day X with the transmissivity data collected for that day so that we can get a correlation between the local visual distance and how much particulate is in the air so that we can use the real-time output of the transmissometer to predict what air quality is for that hour.
The Smithers Physicians Environmental Concerns Committee, meanwhile, is launching a study to try to correlate poor health with poor air.
Yeah, I think that the main thrust would be to try and see if you can make a correlation between people's complaints. This would be the study between people's complaints and the air quality. So that the two problems there is to measure the air quality, a means of measuring the air quality, and secondly, a system of measuring people's complaints. And now that the Ministry of Environment has a transmissometer present in town, we have a way of measuring particulate matter in the air. And I think probably the study with the BC Lung Association would be basically looking at people on a day-to-day basis, their respiratory complaints, measuring them in a fashion, measuring their respiratory complaints, and then looking if there's a correlation between the frequency and the severity of people's complaints and the air quality.
So studies are being undertaken to attempt to provide evidence that smoke is a problem that's making people sick, but those results are at least a year away. Meanwhile, there are controls for the smoke that comes from slash burns and from beehive burners, but not from wood stoves. So, what's needed?
Slash burning, agricultural land clearing, burning, and wood stoves are specifically excluded from the Waste Management Act. We have no jurisdiction over them. All we can use is good information, moral suasion, if you like, and encourage the town of Smithers to enact whatever program they feel they can enact based on concrete information to encourage people to voluntarily curtail burning. Voluntary curtailment has been attempted in U.S. jurisdictions and has been shown not to work, because your neighbor is not going to stop if he doesn't have to, kind of thing. But voluntary programs have been shown to be necessary in order to convince everybody that what needs to follow is a mandatory curtailment program.
Some of the things they could do is, under the Municipal Act, is regulate wood-burning appliances. It's very unlikely council would do that. And even I would have some difficulty proposing legislation municipally to enforce burning regulations. I think it's a provincial issue that they're going to have to come up with some standards.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
A wood-burning stove is one of the most efficient and affordable way to heat a home. When properly cleaned and maintained, a quality wood stove will provide years of reliable performance. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to the archives with John Mitchell.
In other parts of the world where the hazard of wood smoke has been acknowledged, air quality alerts exist to control the burning of wood stoves. The real irony in Smithers is there is a manufacturer in Smithers which produces wood stoves that meet the toughest of emissions standards. In some locales, even on no burning days, clean burning RSF wood stoves can be used.
Oregon and Washington have said, well, we're going to have 3 stages. We're going to have a green light day, an orange light day, and a red light day. And on a green light day, when we don't have emission problems, anybody can burn their wood stove. On an orange light day, when we have marginal air quality, we're going to say, unless you have an approved appliance that has met some sort of emission standards, you're asked not to burn. And then on the red light day, nobody can burn their stove unless it is their only source of heat, or if it meets the stringent, what we call phase 2 certification.
RSF Energy produces appliances that have that certification.
Well, EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. We have one model of stove that's approved for sale in the United States. Our fireplace is one of 5 fireplaces that's approved in the United States. That's a Phase 2 approved appliance. Phase 2 is a 1990 standard that EPA has stipulated, which is about 7.5 grams for a non-catalytic stove, 4.1 grams for a catalytic stove. We're one of 5 manufacturers in North America that manufacture a fireplace that meets that standard. Colorado has strict standards. We're adapted down there. Norway, for example, has a new standard they've just come up with, and it's a durability and emission standards, and they have a test. It's a 2-long-year test, and we're going to be one of 5 stoves that finish that test with approval to sell in Norway, and one of our stoves, the Ardent, is going to finish number 2 in that test. So as a company, we're trying to see where these legislators are taking it, try to help them direct where they're taking it, and then manufacture in accordance with that. What happened in the wood stove industry is the national government in the United States, EPA, came out and says, you can't build a wood stove unless it meets this standard. As far as fireplaces are concerned, we're trying to anticipate what the standard is, build a fireplace that matches that standard, and then says, why don't you develop this standard?
Hans Duriken is the brains behind the RSF wood stoves, a mechanical engineer who first became interested in building a stove that would adequately heat a home in a northern climate. That was about 12 years ago, and before concerns over emissions. But as early as 1981, Duriken began to experiment with making his stoves burn cleanly, saying an efficient burner needs less fuel, and that makes the user happy. It's here in a small lab at the RSF plant in Smithers that Duriken pre-tests his stoves before sending them off to places like EPA labs.
The labs will charge somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a day, depending on what they're doing. And so you don't want to do a lot of experimenting once you get to the lab. And the thing with wood burning is that it's not quite as cut and dried as other fuels. And so you can't just work things out on paper and make them and have them work exactly the way you want. So there's a lot of testing and trial and so forth required before you know exactly what the thing is going to do.
The biggest variable in the operation of a wood stove is the operator. So some tips from an expert on clean burning.
Well, first of all, certainly do what you can to have enough room to store more than a year's supply of wood. And to make sure that you have, that the wood you're using has been stored under a roof for at least 6 months to a year. That will go a long way toward seeing that it's cured and that it will burn more efficiently.
You even have to be conscious of the species of wood you collect. Duriken says in storing softwoods like spruce and pine, don't split them, leave them in rounds. But hardwoods should be split just in half for storage.
Because in the warmer weather, small pieces of wood tend to pyrolyze or gasify a lot faster than you need them to. And then in order for your house not to be too hot, you choke your stove down too much, and that causes a lot of excess smoking.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.